However, in response to this, there's this utterly bizarre sort of physical action that takes place at the end of Goldberg's self-reassurance, where he says, "All the same, give me a blow," and then a pause, "blow in my mouth." So he actually goes through this, completely meaningless incident that exposes a number of different things. So McCann stands, puts his hands on his knees, bends and blows in Goldberg's mouth, and then he says, "One for the road," and blows again in his mouth and breathes deeply and smiles. Now, this sort of trivial sense of rejuvenation that this gives Goldberg is quite important here, because it it completely undermines, I think, the purpose of the exercise in terms of Goldberg's attempt to re-establish his own sense of rationale, and shows us that I think it participates in the sham of this being based on physicality, but it's almost aware of its own absurdity in the fact that we know that, of course, blowing in someone's mouth doesn't fix their teeth in any way. But again, aside from that, it shows us that the meaninglessness of the reassurances that people are prone to give themselves in order to make themselves feel more connected to a sense of authenticity and to give themselves a greater sense of reassurance. So there's this resolution that transforms, and then suddenly Lulu enters, and McCann looks at them and goes to the door. And he says, "I'll give you 5 minutes and exit." So there's immediately this sense of, I think, immediate kind of caution. He extricates himself from this situation quickly. So she says, "What's going to happen? Come over here." "No, thank you. What's the matter? You got the needle to Uncle Natey." So here, I think this exposes his own sort of electoral issues. He's got this bizarre sort of what you would call avuncular desire to be an older man and to frame their sexuality in terms of this bizarre relationship. She says, "I'm going," and then he says again, "Have a game of pontoon first for old time's sake," which I think trivialises their interaction and shows us that his relationship with her was another form of power play, and she says that she exposes this and says, "I've had enough of games. A girl like you at your age and your time of health, and you don't like to take to games." So games are a sign of kind of jocular insecurity, and I think it exposes the way in which they are together. The sense of being free to be playful in order to escape the sense of inauthenticity and alienation that plagues both of them. And Lulu says, "You're very smart anyway. Who says you don't take to them?" So again, he doesn't actually trust her own opinion, and it's actually him at this moment in time that actually uses this phrase. So he's exposing again the sort of lack of logic in his own language. And she says, "Do you think I'm like all the other girls? Are all the other girls like that too then? I don't know about any other girls." So again, this confession sort of counteracts the logic of her own earlier question. She says, "I don't know about any other girls," and then she makes the claim that it's possible in order to do that, because she says, "Do you think I'm like them all?" So that relies on a type of knowledge of them, which she then refutes here. So this confession, I think, it's sort of undermined by the fact that she uses this knowledge to make the claim. Goldberg said, "Nor me, I've never touched another woman," which we know is a complete lie, because he said he's got a wife and he's got kids and all sorts of things in his previous stories. And Lulu distressed said, "What would my father say if he knew, and what would Eddie say?" Again, I think there's a sense of authenticity in Lulu's distress here, and that again, it's this troubling sense of having engaged in something completely inauthentic that maybe is in contrast to a paternal relationship with her actual father, and then Eddie. But again, the fact that this is what she invokes and thinks of shows us the kind of Electra element to her relationship with him. He was my first love, Eddie was, and whatever happened, it was pure with him. He didn't come into my room at night with a briefcase. So there's this absolutely bizarre sense of perhaps a transaction and a business, I think, invoked when she mentions this sort of briefcase as a sign of the inauthenticity of their relationship, or perhaps that it's simply just a work matter, and attempts to invoke a sense of purity with her first love. However, one is led to the position of saying, well, if it was pure, then why is it no longer occurring? He says, who opened the briefcase, me or you? So I think there's a sort of surreal, sexually suggestive line. But again, the power relations are what is evident. It's not necessarily that the act is important, but rather who engages and triggers the action, and who is in the position of authority here. And again, it's him. He says, Lulu Shmulu, let bygones be bygones, do me a turn, kiss and make up. So these are complete empty cliches to do with romance and relationships. Lulu Shmulu, bygones be bygones, do me a turn, kiss and make up. Every single one of them is cliche-ridden patter in the context of false love. He knows this language just as well as he knows the language of false orthodoxy and hierarchy. She says, I wouldn't touch you. And he says, and today I'm leaving, you're leaving, today. And with growing anger, you use me for a night, a passing fancy. So there's, again, she, in spite of the fact that she's attempting to invoke a sense of authenticity, her language is also riddled with cliche. So the repetition, I think, shows a sense of surprise and disappointment, in spite of the fact that she claims to understand that the relationship and the romance was inauthentic. It also reveals its falsity elsewhere, I think, at this moment in time. Goldberg says, who used you? You made use of me by coming when my defences were down. Again, another cliche that she uses to make sense of their relationship here. Who took them down? That's what you did. You quenched your ugly thirst. You taught me things a girl should know before she's been married at least 3 times. Again, absolutely filled with cliche. And so there's again a sense that her own language mirrors his, in spite of the authentic feeling, I think, behind not necessarily the attraction to him, but the feeling of being rejected, I think, is what's important here. Now you're a jump ahead. What are you complaining about? So she, there's a sort of misogynistic suggestion here that what he's done is given her something. He's shown her a good time, so to speak. McCann enters, and Lulu says, you didn't appreciate me for myself. So there's no sense of connection. It's purely based on hierarchies, sort of sexual domination. You took all those liberties only to satisfy your appetite. And that, why did you do it? You wanted me to do it, Lulu, so I did it. And I think here, the connection is purely based on one person's desire to be dominant and the other person's desire to be submissive. And that's very clearly framed, I think, in that kind of electrocomplex fashion that Pinter utilises to depict Lulu's attraction to Goldberg. And she says, and McCann says, that's fair enough. Of course, McCann thinks that's fair enough because it's another relativistic hierarchy that they establish here. And so he actually thinks that it's great. You had a long sleep, miss. So again, he borrows this language of false gentility. Me, your sort, you spend too much time in bed. So there's a very revealing, important thing here. I think the promptings of sexuality are driven by a sort of misunderstood components of the psyche. And they give opportunity for those in power to reassure themselves of their own importance. So we think of this in the play as a whole. That sexuality, in Stanley's case, is sort of warped and misguided. Lulu's sexuality is warped and misguided. But what it ultimately allows them to do, sexuality, it allows people who have very little time for authentic connection to criticise it. And by criticising it, allow themselves to feel A, moralistic, and B, superior. And that's precisely the sort of thing that McCann engages in here. He makes himself feel superior, and he also makes himself feel moralistic by categorising Lulu as your sort, the youngsters that engage in sexual activity frivolously. And then he shows us this sort of religious superiority by asking her if she has anything to confess. And she doesn't understand. And then he savagely says, confess. And there's something more oxymoronic about this. Confess what? Down on your knees and confess what does he mean? And this, again, is important because it's driven by McCann's own tainted sense of moralism. And again, the physicality emphasizes this relativistic and relational reality of morality, that he just forces her down on her knees to confess. And so again, he is invoking his own sense of superiority, and it's the physicality of the stagecraft that gives us that sense of the relational nature of interaction between the characters. And then Goldberg just joins in. Confess, what can you lose? So again, the dynamics of a game, or odds, rather than pure morality for which they stand, become the feature of what Goldberg invokes here. You know, he talks about just engaging in the activity of confession purely because, you know, it increases your odds of, I don't know, some form of spiritual afterlife. And Lulu says, what to him? He's only been unfrocked 6 months. And so again, you know, Lulu obviously he's completely stunned that a man like McCann is a religious authority figure. But again, what that shows us is that the distinctions are blurred by naked power. You know, the fact that his religious position is not immediately apparent strikes Lulu, but actually what we see is that, though, you know, it's completely consistent with the play's aesthetic that he would be a religious figure because it's based in Pinter's mind on hierarchical relations. Kneel down, woman, and tell me the latest. And Lulu, retreating to the back door, tries to ignore this and says, I've seen everything that's happened. I know what's going on. I've got a pretty shrewd idea. And so there is, I think, truth in this. She sees honestly through their posturing. And McCann, again, is in a sort of hallucinatory mode here. I've seen you hanging about the rock of Cashel, profaning the soil with your goings on, out of my sight. So there's, I think, cause and effect blurring here. And I think that's important. He's conflating her with every other religious story that he's heard in Ireland about women not respecting sacrosanct location. The Rock of Castle is what he's talking about. And it's important that it's not possible for her to be the person that has profaned the Rock of Cashel, because it shows us the abstract quality of his domination, the fact that it's just simply domination that's important to him rather than her individual case. And I think it reveals his own sort of ethnic identity. She exits. She says, I'm going, I've had enough of this. She exits. McCann goes to the door, left, and goes out. He ushers in Stanley, who's dressed in a dark, well-cut suit and white collar. He holds his broken glasses in his hand, and he's clean-shaven. McCann follows and goes to the door. Goldberg makes Stanley seat him in a chair. So he ushers in Stanley. And so what we see here is this sense of it being a kind of ceremony. It's a sort of reverse birthday party. It's much more funereal in its atmosphere. But it's still ceremonial in its nature, ushering someone in. He's dressed in a dark, well-cut suit and white collar, so he's the image of conformity. He's wearing the type of clothes that show this pride and appearance and their commitment to society. He holds his broken glasses in his hand, and he's clean-shaven. So now he's presentable and ceremonial, and he's holding the remnants of his kind of previous vision. And it's proof that his way of seeing has been broken. It's proof that they have managed to destroy him. He sits in the chair again and adopts this passive position because he's forced to. Goldberg says, how are you, Stan? Pause. Are you feeling any better? Pause. What's the matter with your glasses? They're broken and pitted. Stanley stares blankly at the floor. Again, the important thing here is that they don't really care whether he can respond, because they don't really care whether he has an authentic self. In fact, they care. They want it to be gone, to have broken it. So there's loss of ego, and self is what's communicated through these pauses, because it shows his complete inability to comprehend his subjectivity. They're questions about him. You know, how are you? Are you feeling any better? What's happened to your glasses? So there's no way of him sort of affirming his own experience here. McCann says he looks better, doesn't he? Much better. A new man. You know what we'll do? What? We'll buy him another pair. So he looks better according to their criteria of appearing to be a sort of a social conformist. He looks much more like everyone else, and is a new man. So based on his conversion, they will provide him with a new ideological vision and a way of seeing reality. We'll buy him another pair. His vision is replaceable as long as it's an inauthentic one. And he, of course, in no way looks better. He's dressed in better clothes, but he's completely vacant and distressed. And so it shows us, I think, their lack of authenticity, the fact that that's what they consider to be better. So they begin to woo him gently and with relish. So they woo him. I think there's a sense of it being seductive, and they're confident then that they've won. And it's gently. There's no more need for force. They've broken him, and it's with relish. They're enjoying their domination. During the following sequence, Stanley shows no reaction. He remains with no movement where he sits. So his inability to understand and react shows us that they don't actually care about his enjoyment of gaining losing his sense of self. They don't care whether he does this and feels like it's the right thing to do. It's simply that they have broken him and that he is subordinated that's important. He says, out of our own pockets, it goes without saying, between you and me, Stan, it's about time we had a new pair of glasses. So there's a sense of familial generosity. And what you'll see is that this seduction of him is as meaningless as the interrogation itself. And it borrows these patterns of orthodoxy in its linguistic groupings. So we see family, and this is you can't see straight. The process has adjusted his vision. But then he says, it's true, you've been cockeyed for years. You're even more cockeyed. He's right, you've gone from bad to worse than worse. You need a long convalescence to change of air. So there's this sort of sense of health and recovery that he borrows here. And that these, we borrow the language of health and medical treatment to tell him that he's going to get better. And then they shift to this sort of combination of deliberately unreal ideas, of a longing to be outside of reality, somewhere over the rainbow where angels fear to tread. Exactly. And then there's this sense of, I think, physical illness and threat. You're in a rut, you look anemic, rheumatic, myopic, epileptic, you're on the verge, you're a dead duck. So they attack his physicality, even though they've just told him that he looks better. Then they shift into the sense of spiritual salvation. But we can save you from a worse fate, true, undeniable. From now on, we'll be the hub of your wheel. We'll renew your season ticket. And here, they, I think, invoke spending and spiritual protection together. And they will spend money and ensure the salvation of his soul, even though his essential identity has been completely destroyed. We'll give a tuppence off your morning tea. We'll give you a discount on all inflammable goods. We'll watch over you, advise you, give you proper care and treatment. So we've got, the idea of physical health and mental health, spiritual health. We've got the church. We've got doctors and nurses. We've got family. We've got the business world. All of these various components of social orthodoxy being invoked through their seduction. Let you use the club bar, keep a table reserved, help you acknowledge the fast days, bake your cakes, help you kneel on kneeling days. So again, McCann slips into these religious recollections, but there's a sense of, I think, consumption and spirituality being woven together here. And they move. We'll provide you with the skipping rope, the vest and pants, ointment, hot poultice, finger stool, the abdomen belt, the earplugs, the baby pad, the back scratching, the spare tire, the stomach pump. And so the shift in here is physical accessories and objects for all of life experiences. So there's a need for an outsider or an outside force that's not approachable as an individual. So we have this sense here that the entirety of his life is being determined for him through all of these objects, and that actually, if we notice the patterns here, we move from some kind of physical sense, a problematic physical sense, into all of these various objects like the abdomen belt and the back scratcher, the baby powder that actually narrate, I think, his destiny almost, his life passage that's being marked out for him. But it is importantly through these objects rather than through some sense of a narrative of his life and of his self, of his identity. And then there's this sort of sense of these cliches of communal belonging and success, We'll make a man of you. You'll be reoriented. You'll be rich. You'll be adjusted. You'll be the pride and joy, a mensch, a success. And so here, based on all of these promises, all these things that they can do for him, it's going to be, in generic terms, it's going to make a social success of him. And lastly, we're talking about power, relativity, and hierarchies. You'll be integrated, you'll give orders, you'll make decisions, you'll be a magnate, you're a statesman, you'll own yachts, animals. And that's where they end. Goldberg looks at McCann here, I think, because there's a sort of dent in the lie and a sense of surprise at what they've sort of stumbled on here. It's almost like an accidental mistake that Goldberg seizes on. I said animals. He turns his back to Stanley. You'll be able to make or break, Stan, by my life. And then there's a silence and Stanley is still. So there's no way of affirming a response to this. There's nothing left. And they're talking basically to a sort of subjectively dead man. Well, what do you say? Stanley's head lifts very slowly and turns in Goldberg's direction. What do you think, eh, boy? And there's, again, deliberately infantilizes him. Stanley begins to clench and unclench his eyes, and that's, again, I think, a signification of his attempted adjustment of his vision and the way he's seeing reality. McCann says, what's your opinion, sir, of this prospect, sir? Prospect, sure, it's a prospect. So again, there's this evasive language that gives us the illusion of comfort and respect, but that, I think, gradually reformulates itself on the fly and shows us the sort of felicity of the term, the luckiness of this prospect, this vision. You know, prospect means both something that you can see and also something optimistic. And then Goldberg seizes on that and shows us the improvisatory nature of their reassurance. Stanley's hands clutching his glasses begin to tremble. What's your opinion of such a prospect, eh, Stanley? And so there's absolutely no way that he can articulate his response to this vision, and we see this further down. He concentrates, he's trying, his mouth opens and he attempts to speak, fails and emits sounds from his throat. So he loses language, his inarticulacy here, his inability to respond in either hostile or positive shows us the complete destruction of the self, the complete destruction of the individual. That I think invites comparisons with Blanche's treatment at the end of Streetcar, the complete destruction of an identity and a degeneration into inarticulacy. And that's actually what becomes the most expressive. We see Stanley here in the most authentic form of communication about himself through this inarticulate noise that shows us that they have completely robbed him of himself. They watch him and he draws a long breath, which shudders down his body, and he concentrates. Well, Stanley boy, what do you say, eh? And again, their articulate responses are in deliberate contrast to his complete loss of language. His chin draws into his chest, and I think there's this sense of collapse in this final physicality. And again, they humour him. There's a sort of torture involved in the way that they respond to him here. What's your opinion, sir? He can't speak. Mr. Webber, what's your opinion? What do you say, Sam? What do you think of the prospects? And I think that they're deliberately juxtaposed here. They're sort of insistent, invasive, cliche-ridden official speak with his disorganised and inarticulate noise, I think, shows us the danger of the people that use this type of language. What's your opinion of the prospect? And they just simply keep releasing themselves. And there's something quite inhumane about their repetitions. You know, that they're torturous. But they're torturous because they're inauthentic. His body shudders, relaxes, his head drops, he becomes still again and stooped. And I think there's an acceptance of the fact that there's no way to revisit any of this and to change any of this. But Petey enters at this moment, and Petey's the final reason for optimism in the play. Goldberg says, still the same old Stan. Come with us. Come on, boy. Come along with us. Where are you taking him? Petey says with surprise. And they turn in silence. So they sound deliberately like their owners with pets. And then the same old Stan is obviously heavily ironic because it's a completely different version of him. And so they've reassured themselves with this cliche that he is stable and that they haven't done anything to him, when actually they've completely destroyed him and they're talking about him as if he's an animal. And Petey says, where are you taking him? So this punctuates their illusion, and that's why there's silence. They know that they're unable to defend him. They defend themselves against PT here. He says, we're taking him to Monty. He can stay here. Don't be silly. We can look after him here. Why do you want to look after him? He's my guest. He needs special treatment. We'll find someone. No, Monty's the best there is. Bring him McCann. And so his lack of a kind of communal legitimacy or family or kin is the reason for his final vulnerability. And so there's a wicked irony here that the weakness of his social connections that are caused by his resistance to orthodoxy and to society are his ultimate lack of failure. You know, he has no one that he can forcefully and conventionally rely upon. And so PT's sort of feeble protest is the only one that shows some sign of standing up for him. They help him out the chair and they all move towards the door left, so they're looking to take him away. And PT first, this is the first time he says something very forceful. He says, leave him alone. So there's this defiant process, and Goldberg studies him because he's a problem to them. And you see this very quick transition because Goldberg becomes insidious, sense of sinister intent. Why don't you come with us, Mr. Bowles? So I think he gives us this sense of trying to induce PT into their process of conversion, trying to actually involve him in this corruption themselves. Okay, says, yes, why don't you come with us? Come with us to Monty, there's plenty of room in the car. So I think it refers back to this sort of earlier mention. So there's this language of a kind of family connection. You know, there's plenty of room in the car that's actually, you know, being shown to be something incredibly sinister. There's a sort of space for abduction. PT makes no move because he realises his resistance is too late, and the fear of willful self-subordination doesn't now think that he wants to be involved in this as well, and so this is a moment of pragmatism. They pass him and reach the door. McCann opens the door and picks up the suitcases. PT's broken. He knows that his resistance is too late, and then this is the only method of possible resistance. Stan, don't let them tell you what to do. Pinter has said that this is one of his most famous, his most important lines. And the only method of resistance or integrity is to not be told what to do, not to cling on to an identity, but not to be ordered around. So they exit immediately. There's an immediate exit in response to this. And then silence. And then we have this gaping void that fills the end of the play. But like Streetcar, it re-establishes a status quo incredibly suddenly. The front door slams, there's the sound of a car starting, the sound of a car going away, and then silence. You know, these silences are powerful because what we're now left with is this huge void in the lives of Meg and PT. In the stage business, though, PT slowly goes to the table. He sits on the chair on the left, picks up a paper and opens it, and the strips fall to the floor. So there's a reminder of the violence within this sort of banal, everyday action that re-establishes the routine of their lives and re-establishes the banal naturalism that opens the play. But there's these strips fall to the floor and shows us the effect. You know, it's a reminder of that hierarchical interaction that's crushed Stanley. He looks down at them and Meg comes past the window and enters the back door. PT studies the front page of the paper. So there's again this resumption, this resurrection of ritual that I think re-establishes the distance between the characters. Meg just says, the car's gone. Yes. Have they gone? Yes. Won't they be in for lunch? No. The questions at the start, I think, re-establish the distance of ritual, which enables the whole plot and shows us that that's being re-established. You know, that people are going to go on being distant and alienated from one another in spite of traumatic experiences of this nature. Oh, what a shame. So there's this huge distance between the two of them where PT has this sort of freshly created awareness of their menace and their hostility, and Meg laments their leaving. This is an enormous moment of dramatic irony. She puts her bag on the table. Is it hot out? What are you doing? So she answers, she says, it's hot out. What are you doing? Reading. Is it good? All right. So there's this immediate resumption of normality. And PT's trapped between a rock and a hard place here. Either, you know, her incomprehension of the fact about what's happened, but then I think the sadness that will then remind him of his own redundant role in their relationship. There's absolutely nothing that he can do, and in the end, he just prolongs the deception. She sits by the table, and Meg says, "Where's Stan?" And there's a pause, there's no response. Because within that is that all of those inarticulate, unspoken fears about Meg's overly attached connection to him, Petey's redundancy in their relationship, and the taboo sort of Oedipal quality to their connection. Is Stan down yet, Petey? No, is he still in bed? Yes, he's still asleep. Sadly, Petey can only agree to perpetuate the illusion. And so Petey, this individual that can see reality clearly, actually begins to be sort of recruited to the dark side, so to speak. He ends up, becoming someone who constructs inauthentic visions of relationships and individuals. And then Meg says, "Still, he'll be late for his breakfast. Let him sleep." And the pauses are huge here. They show us their distance and the impossibility of all that stands between them as a communicative act. That everything that is not being said here cannot be spoken about. Wasn't it a lovely party last night? I wasn't there, weren't you? I came in afterwards. Oh, and there's a huge sense of incomprehension and distance between the two, and also of Petey's redundancy, that she didn't even notice that he was there. And that pause again comes back to this idea that there's no way for them to communicate the connection to each other. But Meg's delusions are huge in this end part of the play, and I think invite comparison with Blanche, dependence on the kindness of strangers. It was a lovely party. It was a complete destruction of her most cherished friend and relationship, but she thinks it's a lovely party. I haven't laughed so much for years. We had dancing, singing, games. You should have been there. It was good, eh? And then again, this sense of insurmountable distance. And then the final lines of the play, I think, are really articulate at capturing this emphatic moment of self-deception that concludes the play. "I was the belle of the ball, were you? Oh yes, they all said I was. I bet you were too. Oh, it's true, I was. I know I was." And this, again, we end with this emphatic representation of the uncertainty of self-knowledge. The self becomes this sort of unknowable enigma here. And that's the central danger that Pinter is warning us about, that we're not sure that we can be known, but the effort to do so is a vital one. So our own sense of self-delusion concludes the play, which is the central danger which actually makes the elements of the violent tragedy of this play possible. That self-deception facilitates all of this relativistic hierarchy that Pinter warns us about in the text itself.